hub to talk about questions of environmental justice and the important organizing work that's happened on the ground over the past like 10 to 15 years. Baltimore, in some respects, is like one of the very first community-based visions, for zero waste. So thinking about questions of just transitions that are coming out from the grassroots. So tonight, I'm going to ask each person if they would to like introduce themselves very briefly, okay? Maybe 2 to 3 minutes, kind of give us a sense of who you are, the organization or group you represent. And then what I was hoping is we only have an hour for conversation. So I really wanted to direct one question towards each panelist to give us a kind of lay of the land on organizing, and kind of wind up at the very end with Brian, who can shed some light on much more kind of national environmental justice kind of organizing, if that sounds good. So we're going to start with Shoshanda. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about the organization you're a part of?
Hi, I'm Shoshanda Campbell. I helped start a group called For Your Voice some years back. And now a part of the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, which still works with For Your Voice. And we work with youth around zero transition in Baltimore to address zero waste future and primarily affordable housing, which are issues that's rooted deeply in our community. That we have been working on for over many of years, as Nikki has stated. And so we thank you, and I thank you for having me on this panel.
And if we could go to Felicia. You have to unmute yourself, I think.
There we go. So hi, everyone. My name is Felicia Porter. I am the new councilwoman-elect for Baltimore City Council, representing District 10. It represents South Baltimore communities to include Brooklyn and Curtis Bay, which are drastically impacted by clean air and environmental justice issues. And so it's my first time in office. I'm a public health practitioner by training, and I look forward to challenging Baltimore City to include public health in the municipal policies that are developed.
Great. And then Heather, I was hoping you could introduce yourself next.
Hi there, I'm Heather Pax. I am a professor in sociology at Towson University. I am also involved in the Zero Waste campaign with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. I participate in the Sunrise Movement sometimes. And and I'm just kind of a gal around Baltimore, dipping my toes into trying to fight injustice. So happy to be here.
Dante just joined us. So if you could say hi, Dante, and introduce yourself very briefly.
Yeah. Hey, folks. I'm Dante here in Baltimore. Work for Energy Justice and know a few of those folks in the movie. So good times.
And Brian, can you tell everyone? I think everyone knows who you are, but still, it would be nice to get a little intro from you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us and hosting this screening tonight. I'm Brian, and I live in Houston, Texas, and have been organizing with Tejas for most of my, I don't want to call it career, but for lack of a better word, majority of my EJ career has been spent with Tejas and building that up, and listening and watching and learning, from elders all across Louisiana and Texas, the Gulf Coast really, and the Southwest. There's just an incredible number of different communities doing beautiful work. So I switched 3 years ago, got a job with Sierra Club, and I'm continuing the same work, just under the banner of Sierra Club, and trying to help redirect resources to those same groups that I learned from and worked with, and also sort of shift how Sierra Club and other big greens collaborate, work with, and do their own sort of organizing work, which has been a long ask from EJ groups for many years. So that's that's me. And on top of that, I still use media, you know, as a major form of communication and organizing, because I think stories are critical, and there's still so many folks who have not, you know, had the spotlight. Story hasn't been told, and yeah, so I do that still too. Thank you.
Thank you. So the idea then is to kind of contextualize some of the struggles in Baltimore as this impact campaign has gone from city to city. I wanted Shoshanda to give us a sense, because I'm not sure everyone knows geographically where Curtis Bay and Brooklyn are kind of located in proximity to the rest of Baltimore, and why they historically have been dumped upon, right, by the city of Baltimore. So if we could give folks a sense of like the history of toxicity down there and what the more recent struggles have been. And Shoshanda came out of the youth organizing, which was probably one of the most effective youth campaigns that I've seen, that was born in a local high school. And she was part of that founding group. So.
And so thanks for that, Nikki. Free Your Voice was started out of Benjamin Franklin High School. A lot of you came together to look at issues that was in our communities, and really living in those issues for a long time. So asthma, upper respiratory illnesses, and many of other health impacts that we had in our community that we didn't quite understand. But what we was posed with was finding out that there was a plan to build the nation's largest incinerator. That was going to be pulling waste from all over. And so we knew that was terrible, and we knew that. So we did a lot of research to understand what that meant for the community. We already know that the community have an open air coal pile that's literally right across the street from the playground where kids play. And then there's the quarantine landfill. Then there's the Bresco incinerator that's in the South Baltimore communities. And then there's a medical waste incinerator. And so this is going to be another thing that was going to be suffocating the residents of South Baltimore. And so that wasn't okay. And so we really did a lot of outreach and talk with residents to let them know about this. It wasn't shocking that a lot of people didn't know. It wasn't even shocking that people said that nothing's going to change. It wasn't shocking because this was a lot of things that people were dealing with for a long, long time. It was embedded and just normalized in the community. And so we started to say no. We started to think about taking back ownership of our community that was lost. And so in that outreach, we started talking to people, and even though some people were a little shaky, they did come through, and they did come to march. They did go down to like the school board who was in on the contract that was going to be getting energy from that incinerator. And we went down there, we sang, we marched, we did poetry. There was a lot that happened down there. And we got them to pull out the contract. And so that really built a lot of power in the community. And then we used that power and that energy and momentum that we had going from that fight to really start looking at these other industries and saying, no, it's not okay. It's not okay that this is the number one air polluter in Baltimore City and it's in a community of low income and people of color. That's not okay. But we also learned that that's a pattern over the world. And over the world, these incinerators are structurally put in those communities because they think that they won't fight back. And so this story, when we did get that win after many of years, over 5 years, really organizing and putting pressure on them, it was a big thing for the community. And we even went nationwide. People started to contact, it brought interest. People were looking at these communities. And so it really changed the conversation in the city around why are we burning our waste and our resources. And so we started to use that energy on this incinerator that we are dealing with now and saying, no, we found that that incinerator costs $55 million a year in health damages to residents. And those same residents are the ones that's leading this movement for a just transition to zero waste. So those residents, we created a zero waste plan for fair development, and that had all of the residents input. It went to these impacted people first who was leading what they wanted to see. And it wasn't shocking, of course, that every time they wanted it to be embedded in equity, because as we see, this system that we have is a racist system, and it's not an equitable system. And so we created that plan based off of what people wanted in the community and what we needed. And so this is where we are. We created that plan. It got adopted through city council. And now we're trying to put that plan into action. And we don't want this to be a plan that just sits on the shelf, because as that plan sits on the shelf, residents are dying. Um, Residents are literally being suffocated by this machinery that we don't need. And so that is like a little bit or a bit about like what we did and where we are trying to get this transition. And I don't want to take up too much time because I know that everyone else needs to speak.
Sure. But I do want you briefly, since we are raising money tonight for the South Baltimore Land Trust, I would like you to connect land and the question of land reclamation and long-term affordable housing to environmental justice. So it'd be great if you could kind of connect those issues for our viewers so they know how important land trusts, community-based land trusts are for alternative visions of development.
Absolutely. I thought you were going to ask me a question about it. That's why I
yeah, all right. I gave you, I threw you the ball.
So to finish that, we started to think about land in a way of like who owns this community, because we knew it seemed like it wasn't us, even though we should be the owners of this community because we were living in it, we was breathing it, and this is what we called our home. And so we started to create a map of who owned properties in that community, and that map was who owns our community. And we saw a lot of vacant lands just being used as dumping grounds. The system already made us a dumping ground. We couldn't physically have dumping grounds literally all over our communities. So we had lots that was abandoned. We had homes that wasn't being built, and people were just holding on to those homes. People that didn't even live here. They literally live all around the world, owning home and lands inside of Brooklyn and Curtis Bay in the South Baltimore region. And that's not okay, because they're just waiting for it to be they can get some profit back, while it was an eyesore to the communities that we lived in. And so we started to look at ownership of land, and we wanted to get that land, because these problems, it wasn't enough, to just give people a home, but we really wanted to give them clean air to match that, just like any other community also deserves. So the South Baltimore Community Land Trust that's why we really built that entity as a tool to own land in communities that is governed by the community. That makes it puts residents in this decision-making mode, that they have agency over what happens in their community, which they didn't have that before. And so it is very important that we are now building 10 passive homes, primarily affordable homes that will be for residents. So we can do this development in this community without displacing residents. This community don't get a lot of investments, if I'm being honest, but they do get a lot of pollution, and that's not okay. And so we wanted to be given that development that is also needed for survival in our communities at a rate that's affordable. We didn't want any more slumlords that we already have raising prices to make a profit while the people were suffering. And so that's why we're collecting lands, and we have those lots, and we plan on building those 10 homes. And of course, that needs funding. And so it would be, it's really great because it is something that unify all of us around making sure that people survive and that people can live in their community in a respectable way that right now they don't have. They don't have that. And we are the only ones that can build that within the community where impacted people are taking a stand and doing it.
Absolutely. So thanks for that. And I just want to plug that since this is Giving Week, right, and Giving Tuesday, it would be a wonderful gesture for folks to step up as an act of solidarity to frontline communities and really put money where their politics is, right, and invest in community-based land trusts as a vision for democracy, for more just communities, and for people on the ground really defining what they want to see, right, in a place like Curtis Bay. So the conversation that I kind of wanted to open up to Dante and Heather as a team, we'll go with Dante first and then maybe Heather, is to think about the question of critical solidarity. So Shoshanda spoke from the perspective of like folks on the ground and high school students organizing initially against the nation's largest trash to energy incinerator. Dante comes from an NGO, Energy Justice, and Heather Hacks is a professor at Towson. What can critical solidarity look like with frontline communities? Dante, I'd like for you to speak a little bit about coalitional work. That's the question I wanted to ask you, which is like, how do we work in effective coalitions around questions of environmental justice, racial equity, alternative economic structures? What can that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that people have to understand now that aren't necessarily environmentalists or what have you is that building up climate justice in our city and our state and across the country and the world is an intersection of not only environmental justice but also economic justice, social justice, and the like. You're going to get more jobs created out of the green economy than you ever are maintaining the fossil fuel industries, maintaining any of these dirty chemicals or what have you, because it's all about innovating, redesign, being more sustainable. And the numbers have been with us for a while, but they're increasingly more and more with us. I mean, coal plants are going to be all coal plants across the U.S. are going to be unprofitable in the next 10 years, and then natural gas, that's been like the stopgap for a lot of places, that's going to be unprofitable by the middle of the next decade. So they're running out of time with this other stuff. But we need to engage all these different aspects and organizations going into this work. So, I mean, as Shoshana was talking about, like the need for affordable housing, not only in Curtis Bay, but across Baltimore. I mean, we have some of the highest number of vacant homes in the entire country. I think like 15 or 17,000. And yet there's still people getting pushed out of their homes consistently. It's a high level of unhoused population in the city and what have you. And you've got a situation where we have bought into this idea that we need to use gajillions of dollars towards policing to handle crime, when in actuality, you don't solve crime by continuing to use this oppressive force. Instead, you actually build up those communities with the funding that could go towards developing these community land trusts, towards developing zero waste businesses, retrofitting buildings, building up the zero waste infrastructure, things like that, and giving people that access to jobs and a steady living will reduce the issues that are before us. So when it comes to a coalition, we've got to have these different pockets of folks working on certain things in the city to understand that there.
I think he froze, right? Yeah. Dante, it seems like your internet is
System
coming.
within them.
Okay, there we go.
And yeah, sorry. Hopefully that'll quit doing that. But yeah, we've just had our outgoing mayors agree to a new 10-year contract with our incinerator, which is the 630th in the entire country. Even though it would be cheaper to go in the direction that Shonda and everyone else here in Baltimore have been advocating for. But people don't register that. And so we've got to be able to get all these different groups together to push back against this idea that the status quo is the only way to go, when in actuality it's far cheaper, far more effective, far more beneficial to boost the stuff that we've been advocating for. And so now, as we enter this transition to a new mayor, and Baltimore is kind of funky in that the new mayor comes into December over January, like other cities. Some of us are on our incoming mayor's transition team. We just had our first meeting yesterday, and it's clear that we're going to push some buttons and step on some toes to call out the injustices that are going on across different topics of discussion in order to build the Baltimore that we've wanted for so long. So so I think it is about finding that common ground, building on that, understanding that these intersections are the way to get us in a different direction, and that climate justice plays a huge role in making sure we achieve all these different pieces of our goals. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. So question of solidarity. I want to flip that to Heather and think about the ways in which universities are just one more extractive industry. And we could compare universities to kind of broader fossil fuel industries coming and mining data from communities and extracting it. So what does critical solidarity look like from inside public universities? Like, how do you build alongside communities?
So, so I'm very aware of the potential extractive relationship that universities have on not only collecting data and kind of using the work that community residents are doing or the surrounding communities are doing as like a kind of, let's say, career ladder. Like I do see some of my students in social movements here, and I asked if I could get some funding to have some speakers come and talk, and they were like, "Oh, we don't really have that." And I was like, "Then I'm not asking, because I don't ask people to work for free, because activists work so hard and are always asked to like do free labor, and so there is a lot of that kind of extraction, to in that way, but also, and especially, oh my God, it's like always like women of color are always being asked to do this work. But but the other thing is that universities come in to communities and displace a lot of the residents in those communities, and I'm not going to say Hopkins, but Hopkins.
We all know the big elephant in the room. We don't have.
But that said, so all of that said, so there the university industrial complex, or whatever we want to call it, right? That can have that extractive relationship, but also I'm part of the university. I believe in the university. I believe in education as being a stepping stone to a vibrant and functioning democracy. Hopefully we'll keep that. And for learning how to be active participants, right? So I think one thing, I have several things written down, but like one thing is just using an educational platform to teach people how to be critical consumers of their of information, right? And because it is really, really difficult for people, especially these days, to kind of understand like which way the wind is blowing. So I think that I don't think that it is. It is not my understanding that my role is to be a neutral observer of injustice and find it just fascinating and interesting, right? But to teach people about those injustices and also how to impact their worlds. So on that level, education and educators. And then secondly, as I kind of took a big crap on Hopkins, but there are Hopkins researchers who are doing some amazing work with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust and trying to figure out how to measure some of the pollutants that are coming out of the incinerator, right? So that community engaged research that, that Nikki, I'm going to give you a big plug on that one with your work in South Baltimore with the students at Benjamin Franklin, with the scientists who are trying to kind of help us parse out all these data, with social science research, with lawyers. Oh my God, lawyers! We need lawyers. We always need lawyers, right? And so you see like University of Baltimore Community Law Clinic, right, helping people get their nonprofits off the ground or work out legal problems in their community development organizations, right? So so I think that the university can act. There are many examples of people in universities who are doing great work in aiding and being of service to movements rather than extracting from movements. And then I think the university itself does carry the potential to create frameworks of development without displacement, right? Like, what would it look like to have universities that have living wage jobs, right, for the surrounding community members? I mean, what one could look at Harvard as an example of this. This is not because Harvard is generous, but because of movements that created these really like robust living wage jobs so people can live in the communities where they work, right? So you often see that kind of displacement where you have service workers unable to afford to live in the communities where they work and having long commutes and, you know, and especially in Baltimore, really terrible public transportation. And, you know, so how do students and community members hold these universities accountable for the roles that they play in developing those communities? I'll stop there. I have lots more thoughts, but that's enough.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. And you know, I saved Felicia as our last Baltimore panelist for, you know, a perspective that I think we are all anxious to hear, which is like, you came out of Morgan's public health program. You were mentored by the Dr. Lawrence Brown, who is a very well-known scholar, activist, who, in the way that Heather Hacks is talking about citizen science and data for the people, he exemplifies that, right? He uses public health as a tool or an arm of struggle. In many respects, he has coined the term, the white L geography of investment, right, in white communities, and disinvestment in the Black butterfly, East and West. And thinking about South Baltimore, like, how does that fit on a map, right, of this racialized geography? So Felicia, we're so excited to have you because we hope you will represent the people. And I know that that is a hard balance, right? And so how do you remain committed to environmental, social, economic, and racial justice when in a city like Baltimore, you're always forced into this neoliberal paradigm? You're forced to compromise with large-scale developers. So could you shed some light on your vision for South Baltimore and what you hope to accomplish?
So you bring up a great point, and when I started talking about implementing a public health lens on a city level, Dr. Brown was actually one of the first people that I spoke with, and he challenged me to really think through what public health looks like, at a city level. Oftentimes, when we think of health policy, we often go to the state or the federal level. But what does it look like at a municipal level, whereby you are you're impacting the people that you serve in a very practical term? And one of the things that, you know, I often caution people to when they talk about the white L and the Black butterfly is that, to my knowledge, they are not representing South Baltimore at all, in those respective conversations. So when we're talking about real, true, compounded disenfranchisement and disinvestment, South Baltimore is kind of like a twofold, whereby we're not close enough to Anne Arundel County to get those resources, but we're not even close enough in Baltimore City in order to garner those resources that we are paying for. And so it is imperative that you know, when we think about climate justice, when we think about environmental justice, we're not only just thinking about communities that can travel to Midtown Baltimore. We're really talking about communities that can't even get to the fringe of Midtown Baltimore City. And so it's regarding and clear about this all throughout my campaign is ensuring that we not only create healthy communities, but we create connected communities, particularly in South Baltimore, that will be connected to main Baltimore City. I've been very clear of that all throughout my campaign, and so it's going to be really interesting to see my vision be manifested through District 10. I'm going to be coming in strong with a strategic plan. Using my community organizing background to not only organize the organizations and the community stakeholders here in District 10, but also expanding to community as well. Because let's be frank, there are people that are existing in South Baltimore that are not connected to a community association. They are not connected to a neighborhood group, and they're not connected to a stakeholder group, and they also deserve to be heard as well.
Mhm. Thanks. So, Brian, I want you to be able to tie all these pieces together. No, I would love for you to reflect on larger EJ organizing and think about kind of Baltimore as a hub, right, for fair development, grassroots initiatives around zero waste and land trust. How do you see this fitting into the broader struggles across the United States and maybe even globally, right?
Wow. That was amazing, y'all. And what a well orchestrated like list of questions. And I've been taking notes because I I'm learning, and I think that's the most important thing that anyone who is involved in this work can do is to remember that everyone um, has a wealth of knowledge, even if they're just telling you and sharing their experience of living in a place. So when I was listening to Shashawanda and the youth organizing and just how incredible youth movements have been in my lifetime, I've seen the youth completely transform the country in so many areas, not just environmental activism, but the fight for ethnic studies, um, the most recently in the climate fights, but everything in between. The immigrant rights cause from the 2000s that I remember was led by youth movements too. And there's just a beautiful thing that is important to recognize, and that's that youth can see problems as they're growing up. They can
Mhm.
pick them out like blindfolded, man. It's like the coal plant, the waste incinerator, the abandoned homes, you know, and they can figure out very quickly like what the solutions are too, right? And they realize quick that the elders and the adults and the politicians are not interested. They know also what the problems are. They're trying to brush it under the rug because they're profiting from it, or benefiting from it in some way. And these are systems that have been in place for long periods of time, and they stem from the original sins of colonization and slavery, right? I heard many folks talk about absence of land and free labor. It's still happening. That's what they always expect from us, right? They want our land and they want our labor, compensate us for either. So those two things remain very, very important parts that have yet to be fixed. And and this gets really important when you're thinking about building those networks, right? And trying to build solidarity from white allies, from folks perhaps from and I don't know Baltimore well, but from the white L community. Because I'll tell you, in Houston, we had a transformation of our county government, and there were opportunities to address the infrastructure deficits, that have been present in our city for decades. But the white communities do not want to pay more taxes. They don't want, to accept that tax money is going to address deficits in other neighborhoods and other communities, because they see that as taking money that belongs to them. Never mind the long history of, deliberately taking money and exploiting these other communities, low income communities of color. Um, and so, you know, what happens is they they prey on these communities, And I think part of that is with the homes. We see gentrification, we see absentee landlords investing in communities, and in a sense colonizing neighborhoods, right? Like picking, checkerboarding neighborhoods, buying a house here, buying a house there, and waiting for your community to fail, waiting for the to finally like get to that threshold where they can, make enough profit to initiate that gentrification process. And then all of a sudden you see tax increment reinvestment zones and all of these, citywide programs that make it seem like they're wanting to help the communities of color, low income communities, but actually it's a recipe for displacement. um, and you get pushed out because of the taxes, and and you know and they also, deliberately externalize their own cost, so they place all of these facilities in your neighborhoods. At the same time they're, slowly buying lots, they're also putting facilities in your neighborhood. um, like, when I was organizing 10 years ago, this was under the Obama administration. I remember there was a program called the Cash for Clunkers. This was, supposedly to get rid of really dirty cars off the road. But who got the vouchers to buy new cars? It was the wealthy folks who could actually afford to buy a new car. And where did all the old cars go? Well, all of a sudden we had dozens of recycling facilities crop up in our neighborhoods, and they were bringing all these old vehicles, and grinding them up right in yards. So, this is in addition to the things that already existed, before that. So everything is, connected, and there's a never an end to the insults, that happen, and you got to be sharp, right? Because the level of oppression is sophisticated. It's very sophisticated, and we've worked with institutions, academia, scientists to try and get the data, right? To get the actual numbers, that these facilities are causing harm, to link a specific chemical to the cancers happening in the neighborhoods. And we've participated in community-based participatory research. We got a really good grasp on what that meant from Peggy Shepard and Cecil, who we lost this year. It's there's so many ways that small groups have attempted to participate, with institutions and governments. And we had a transition team too here in the city of Houston, and the mayor ignored all of the recommendations. So, it's
Uh-oh.
difficult because you can spend months and years in good faith working with people. And it's so upsetting. It's so upsetting when, after 2 or 3 years, they can just, turn their back on you. And so I would caution folks, that the real power lies within the communities right where they are, and to continue to work with them and be mindful of, who you spend your time with. Is it with politicians? Is it with scientists? Is it with lawyers? Or is it with the community? Because at the end of the day, that's where you're gonna have your biggest impact. And yes, it's important to have politicians and scientists and lawyers collaborating, supporting, because those are the avenues for change to happen, in this country, in this city, in our states. But when those all fail, if you have the community, right there with you, that's who's going to show up when you have a disaster, a hurricane. That's who's going to help you out. And those mutual aid networks, and the relationships that you have with people, are so important, and so critical. And there are the insults that we have, but those relationships can counter so much of the negativity. you know it can really, even balance out sometimes, all of the things that we're faced with. And that's not to say that we don't need change and we don't deserve change and we shouldn't fight for it. But it's really important to remember, who your family and friends and allies are, and to continue to work together and support each other as a community, right? Like that that spreads upwards, right? Bottom up organizing. Then the politicians come, then the lawyers come, then the institutions come, and then you can make those relationships equitable. So in academia, authorship, right? Like, don't just pay them, but acknowledge their knowledge. Give them credit, give them bylines in the research and the articles and the stories.
Totally.
you know all of those things in every way that you can lift people up, for all of the work that they do, all of the time that they spend financially, but intellectually too. It's just as important.
Great. There's a few questions in the chat that I want everyone to respond to. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention at all, and hopefully, Brian, there's time for you to respond too. But one is about the 10 years and the Bresco contract. It's very specific to Baltimore. I think a lot of people are concerned about the next 10 years and what that means. So if folks could speak to the specific actions coming out of this call, right? Like, how do you funnel empathy for frontline communities into political action and solidarity? And Bresco and anti-incineration work seems to be one area. So folks could speak to that. And then there is a really important question about youth that I want to make sure we get to, which is from Ola in the chat, who asks, I'm part of a youth-led organization, and we're trying to both amplify voices of those who are on the ground. With that being said, what advice would you give to young organizers like us trying to make change without falling into the trap of depending solely on the state? I think that's a brilliant question, and maybe each panelist could speak a little bit to both of those questions. Just unmute yourself if you would like to jump in. It's free for all right now. Let's start with the first 10-year contract one. Shoshanda, you unmuted
Yeah,
yourself.
you want to go first, Shoshanda?
Oh no, I think Dante unmuted first, so Dante, you can start.
No, you go.
Okay. I was just gonna add to that it's not a put or pay contract. That it is a contract for 10 years, but it does not mean that we can't divert waste from going there, and going into new markets and creating that for Baltimore City. We are still working on that just transition to zero waste. It doesn't stop because a contract was signed. It just amplifies the work that we are doing. No, Dante.
Yeah, I mean, Shauna put it up there, and it's very frustrating because it really could have just been left to the Scott administration to disagree on moving toward it. But the outgoing mayor, in his utter brilliance, decided to keep us in this situation. And just to give it just like a straightforward idea. So we're about to spend $10 million a year in theory, if just as a baseline, for the next 10 years. Within that amount of material we're about to go burn for the next decade, let's just say it's worth at least half that amount, so $5 million. It's probably worth even more, but we're just going to be simple. We're now saying let's spend $10 million to burn $5 million for the next 10 years. And just how ridiculous that sounds for any city, but specifically one that is in need of environmental and economic justice. And that's what this mayor has decided to try to pursue, this outgoing mayor, as opposed to listening to the people, listening to the incoming mayor, and going in a different direction. But like Shoshanda said, in theory, we don't have to send anything to them once this new contract starts in 2022. The problem is actually getting the city government and the Department of Public Works to commit in the direction we want them to go. So there is hope. And if we can shift the definition of how like trash is defined, maybe we install a zero waste hierarchy that says, oh, we've got to send all of our waste here, there, that, and the other before we finally decide to settle it and send it to Willifrater / Bresco. So that's an option. But to to the other points on youth and engaging with the state, I think there's kind of a combination, right? Because you can get funding from outside sources to build the future that you want to create or play a role in building that future. So an example, raising the money for the community land trust is important, because sometimes cities have little interest in doing that type of work. At the same time, I think you've got to have both the outsider tactics and the insider tactics working concurrently in order for you to build that community at a whole scale level. And so you can definitely work on the outside, but you also need some allies, if not a whole city of allies, to get some of these other pieces done. Like right now, as I mentioned, our police budget is $550 million, which is over a quarter of the city's population. It's more money per person for police than any city in this damn country, which makes no damn sense. And we're probably losing population again when the census comes out. So if we actually move the money into other avenues and push for that, that creates a greater, more just system, so an oppressive one. So you've got to be able to work on the outside and push and get the funding from private sources and community members and things like that. But you also still need at least some component to get out of your in the inside, to get out of your way, or to facilitate even more just growth in the community. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think just to add on the youth organizer, I think it also starts within the community. It starts with growing that power and that connection with residents, that you do have that bond to be able to even come up with a strategy around why you want the funding. What do you need the funding for? And then there are a lot of grants, and there are a lot of organizations that's looking for groups that's doing community organizing, that's trying to that's helping EJ communities. And there is funding for that. And even for like the land trust work that we are doing, there wasn't really much city funding or really much any state funding for land trusts. So that funding is what we fought for through the trust fund, which is it's a space where money is held, like $20 million, that is going to be directed to primarily affordable housing. And so that was fought for many of years, and that just got accomplished. So even if there isn't funding, there that's in certain spots that you need it to be to like get things like land trust tools started up. You have to fight for that. That is something that you need to organize around. That is something that you need community power to get. So it always starts in the community, and it starts with then knowing what your strategy is and what you're going to ask for, and why you need it. And you, even if you're youth, you still have a voice. Your voice matters. And don't get intimidated with talking to people older than you. It can be hard, but don't get intimidated. Just know that you're on the right side, you're doing the right thing, and do your research so you can also educate what's happening in the community and what to fight for.
Felicia.
And I'll jump in here. I'll jump in here too, because from a Baltimore perspective, I know just before this call, and in previous emails, working to not only organize around this 10-year contract, but figuring out different creative and strategic ways in order to kind of blunt this huge blow to South Baltimore. And I think that when we talk about policy, that's one of the things that I'll be challenging a lot of my community groups is, to look at the direct, but to not only look at the direct impact, but look at the indirect impact, where in which one of my mentors used to call them loopholes. When I worked on Capitol Hill, literally, it is just singular lines that can change the direction of a policy in order for you to make a true impact. So it is really having that commonality thought, convening your attorneys, convening your environmental activists, convening your business stakeholders, speaking in the vocabulary where in which they will understand what you are trying to say. Because when people say they want to change health, it's so funny to me when people say they want to change health, but they do things that directly impacts the things that they are trying to impact. And so and sometimes, what Shoshana was saying, sometimes you got to educate them. Again, framing is very important in policy. And so, under my administration, it's really training and retraining community leaders to speak in the vocabulary where in which everyone can understand for a common goal, because we all want clean air. We all want to increase small businesses. We all want to make Baltimore better. It's just a way how to get there, and everyone can win if we just sit and really think through our brilliance in order to get to that place. As far as the youth organizing perspective, I think, I think sometimes, youth are actually a little bit more daring than the adults. For me, I'll actually be the youngest person on Baltimore City Council, and so I am historically always talking to someone that's older than me. But I think that as you gain confidence, what Shoshana was saying, gaining confidence not only in the literature and the research, but gaining confidence in the community organizing support that you are garnering, and not just from door-to-door action. Many of the community organizing that I see, particularly from the climate justice movement, happens on social media. And so really utilizing your strong points of your generation. I mean, again, being the youngest person on city council, when we first started talking about public health, when I first came into the game in Baltimore, people wouldn't listen to me. Now it's everything they talk about. And so, sometimes the youth foreshadow where the direction that we need to go. And so if it's any kind of inspiration to you, look at the people on this panel. I assume that we are all under 40. I will put it out there, but we are all young at heart, and we have started at a, I would assume each of us have started at a very young age. So just because you're young does not mean that you don't know what's going on. So
Thank you so much. So I want to I know Brian has to hop off pretty soon, and we are going to end at 8:40. This could go on forever because this is a vibrant group, and really just folks who have been committed to this kind of organizing work for a very long time. So Brian, there was a question directed to you, and I do want Shoshana after you to answer it, because sometimes I think youth are pretty beaten down, and it is hard to mobilize and to activate and to see deeply, to feel, and to translate that into political action. So that was a question directed to you, but I also think we see it, right, Shoshana, in South Baltimore. So maybe you could start us off, Brian, and then we could continue that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's always a way to look at things, and there are many words to describe a situation in many perspectives. So when I see apathy, um, I always feel like that's a word, it's an emotional word, right, that we apply to folks who aren't doing what we think they should be doing for their own good. It's like, oh, why don't people care? Why don't they care? But I heard this other word, and actually I think it was Shashawanda that mentioned it, and that's learned helplessness, right? It's like some folks are just tired. It's like, man, I've been doing this for a long time, and I haven't seen the change happen, you know, or I've seen someone else try it and I haven't seen the change happen. And so what I always say is I uh I have learned how to fail spectacularly and still have a very positive attitude, because I'm doing what I want to be doing, and I care about the issues and the people, and I see things, that can be fixed. And so if I keep that as my guide, my mantra, and I just do the work, you know, of course not everyone's gonna to believe you, to even see, what's happening to them. We're being poisoned, man, and we're, you know, struggling just to survive, being assaulted on so many different levels, police violence, um, poor air quality, poor water quality, poor housing, poor education systems, police brutality, you name it. All of these things take a toll. And so sometimes it's also just not at the top of their list either. Whatever it is you're trying to organize for, you know, folks may have 10 other things that are more pressing to them. And so listen to them. You know, I think it's really important to have those conversations with folks, um, and so that we don't project attitudes or, you know, negative ways of being onto others without trying to understand, you know, what may be causing, you know, folks to not participate, to not want to participate. um, and you know, over time, as we just heard from Felicia, it's like, if you're doing the work and you're speaking truth, you know, people will begin to see the evidence build up. You know, unfortunately, it's taken a lot of loss, a lot of cancer, a lot of death, a lot of devastating storms, a lot of chemical explosions for people to start to see the connections to the environmental issues and their own health, right? To their own even emotional and spiritual sanity. um, it's connected. We have been separated from the land forcibly. You know, we were removed from it, we were forced to work it, and we live in places where the air quality and the outside environment can do us physical harm. So I think understanding, you know, how difficult it is for people to even want to engage in this work is really important. And then to start, you know, to just do the work yourself. What makes you happy? Um, Again, as Felicia said, the tools that are present, you know, in your age group, or, you know, that you really enjoy using. Make the work fun, make it fulfilling, and try not to take everything personally when folks, you know, don't show up, don't participate, and try other ways of organizing. You know, we don't get it right the first time. Or we would have solved this, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. My dad would have solved it, my mom would have solved it. So just keep at it, keep at it, you know, keep the faith, do good work, be kind, be forgiving, be patient, um, and also, you know, continue to speak out to folks in positions of power, right? Never give up on them. And, you know, the majority of what I said before is directed at your relationships with the impacted communities, the oppressed peoples in these communities, you know, who struggle day to day just to survive. For those in positions of power, you know, be a thorn in their side, like, you know, constantly, um, speak when you can, and try and get others to speak too. You know, remind them of promises they made, hold them accountable, you know, for things that they didn't, you know, stand by, um, and then make them, you know, also be advocates, be advocates, strong advocates. Just don't tell me that you support what I'm doing. Say it publicly. You know, you got to say it publicly. You're a person in a position of power, and folks listen to you, they're looking to you for leadership. You gotta stand up and speak your truth, you know, on behalf of the folks who are too tired, too sick, um, and maybe, you know, have lost faith in the system. That's where we're at. That would be my only suggestion, and it's what I try to do. And you're gonna have bad days,
Mhm.
have really bad days where you just want to quit and just stop. And you may need to take a break, you know, and that's okay too. But always believe in people, you know, always believe in people, always believe in yourself, and keep doing good work regardless.
Thanks so much, Brian. So I want to give Shoshana, we have 3 minutes left of this conversation. I want to give you an opportunity to also make a plug for how folks can get involved, because that's the ultimate goal, is to build a much broader movement here, right?
Yes, I put in the chat how to get involved with the work. Our Twitter is at Baltimore South. You can search us on Facebook at Baltimore Community Land Trust. And email us at mysbclt@gmail.com. And I just want to add one more thing, that this system has been constructed long time ago, and nothing's going to happen fast. It's not one of those things that you do something and then get a direct just response back. It doesn't work like that. It takes a lot of time. It takes dedication. It takes patience, and definitely when you're dealing with the older generation, because they have been dealing with this for a long time. And some people are tired. Some people believe it won't change. And then some people that don't have the education to know, you just provide that education. That's what you can do, and you can hold people accountable. That was as what was said, and never settle. Never settle for some excuse that we need this incinerator. We need this. This is how it has to be. No, it does not. And continuously stand on that. Never settle for anything less than what your community deserve, especially when you see it being given to other communities. So you know it can happen. So never settle, and always keep going. Be dedicated.
Thanks. So I think that that's a great place to end with Shoshanda's last words of never settle, and to kind of keep thinking, right, about how to build these broader coalitions to hold folks accountable. I love what he said about being a thorn, right? And that's Felicia's role, is to really bring these demands, right?
Yes. Making sure they're sustainable for generations to come as well.
Exactly. So I want to thank you all. You were an incredible group. You animated each other. I'm excited to see what we build together. And a 10-year contract is not going to be the end all and be all. We're going to continue to fight, right? For thinking about how to redirect, divert the waste, how to educate on the ground and at every single scale. And we look to you, Felicia, to bring some of these stories directly into the seat of power, right? So thank you all.
Okay. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you all. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Crew.
Thank you.
Good times.
Yeah.
Thank the panel also.
Yeah. Go panel, go. Woo.
Go panel. Now let's go take down Bresco.
Yeah, for real. No,
Yeah, that's what I'm on my way to right after this
All
call.
that
Right. This was just a stop. This was
Maybe
just
you guys can just knock it down with all the people in the chat.
right. We got time.
we have 24 people. Let's go, guys.
Yes.
Hi, Patty. So good to
Bye,
see
folks.
Hi, Patty. Thanks for joining us. Well, guys, great job tonight. And
Thanks for inviting me.
yeah,
Good
thank
night.
you.
It was very nice to see y'all. I am going to disconnect. I just didn't want to. It was such a great discussion. I just didn't want to shut it down like that.
And it was
Yeah, no,
so nice to have such different perspectives. It really was, so.
You guys have a good night.
Bye-bye.
You as well.
Thank you, Anna, for all the logistics. Bye-bye,
Thank
everyone.